call the meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee to order. Let's start with introductions. Mr. Gates.
Dean Gates, Assistant Counsel.
Oh, Susie Marshall, IT Department.
Okay.
Bill Fossey, Municipal Manager.
Lance Rover, Office of Management and Budget.
Robert Harris, CFO.
Forrest Dunbar.
Christopher Constant.
John Weddleton.
Pete Peterson. Felix Rivera.
Susie M. France.
Amy, are you on the phone? Is there anyone on the phone? Okay. All right. So let's get started. Mr. Harris, I believe you're up first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the financial status of the municipality, we're in good financial shape. We're paying our bills, and we have money in the bank.
Are there any questions for Mr. Harris? Mr.
Paying your
Trainer?
bills on what budget? Do you know what the fund balance was last year, using the budget reserve we had?
Great, thanks. So that's a good point. So Lance, I'm sure, could dissect this perhaps a little better than I'm going to. But we have an approved budget that we're using to go ahead and to pay our bills as they come in and to do the work of the municipality. The unencumbered fund balance that has been the subject of a number of questions recently, and normally it would not be this late. Normally we'd have had a number for you about 2 to 3 months prior. I think the delay you're seeing is a result of the implementation of a new software program that by the middle of May, at that point, was it substantially complete enough for us to use and to be able to do these additional things that we would normally do in the normal course of business. Right now, we're still in the period of closing the 15th month. I'm getting to answer your question. I hope you don't think I'm...
You can use it in SAP. We understand the financial program.
Yes. So we're at the process still of closing the 15th month. A month ago, I could have told you that we thought we had about $2.5 million of unencumbered fund balance. And the reason I say I thought was because there could be some additional monies that would be expensed against that, or there could be additional settlement type dollars that would have basically reimbursed departments and added back to that fund balance. We're still in that process of trying to come to some materially accurate number for what fund balance is so that we can tell you and be off to the races with respect to how we ended up in 17. As Lance has mentioned in the past, we still, in addition to that, have the 10% and the 2% reserves that we use to basically take care of
Front the money for government.
take care of what we need to take care of. For example, if there's an additional $150,000 we have to spend on an election, for example, that's money that we hadn't anticipated, and we would have it available for that. So I don't have a number for you right now on the what we think the 2017 fund balance is going to be. A month ago, I would have told you it would be about $2.5 million. As we post additional dollars to period 15, that number may or may not go down. And then as well, we may find that we have some settlement monies that we could recover.
Okay, let me, one other question, Mr. Chairman. BDL, how are they doing with their audit of the city, given the factor of SAP and the slowdown we're finding with that? Is that causing them problems as they're doing the audit of the city?
Thank you, through the chair, Mr. Trainee. So BDO, and I'll point out that one of our auditors is actually in the audience. They've been very good about working with us, understanding that we're implementing a new set of software that we've had to sort of extend out our schedule for when we would have them come in and help us understand, help us look at the information to be able to perform their audit. They've been great about doing that. We're trying to get that wrapped up. We hope we'll have a final CAFR ready by the end of August. It's reasonable to think it might be the end of September. I'm just sort of prepping you. I have some dates coming up where we will be submitting a draft CAFR. Basically, we're going to pull together everything we know is that we have as of the 25th of July, so that beginning the morning of the 26th, we can submit what we have into the EMA system for securities for our bondholders, along with a letter that basically states that there's a material event, which is that the CAFR's not done. We're still implementing a new system, and we'll have the CAFR finalized when we get it done. So that'll be coming out soon, and as that happens, then that's one of the for us one of the pieces that's critical for us being able to release the final CAFR is the work of the auditor finishing their tasks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Note for the record, we've been joined by Ms. Rouse from the mayor's office, and also, I believe Ms. Domboski is now on the phone. Amy, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you. Mr. Constant, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks. Now a couple. What I think I just heard you say is that you're anticipating August, September now being when we have final close books on 17.
Yes, sir.
So just for the record, in April we heard May, June.
Mhm.
So it's May, June, May, July, August, September. And, you know, my perspective, at some point, any additional expenditures that we need to make that are fund balance, we might need to start taking out of departments, right? Because we're taking money now that we don't know that we have, and it's long enough into the game. It's the insecurity or the uncertainty is becoming pretty high on my perspective. It doesn't seem like we're getting tighter. It seems like it keeps moving farther. Does the submission of a material finding to the rating companies harm our bond rating?
Thanks. Through the chair, Mr. Constant. No. What it basically does is it says the final is not ready. We'll be publishing it when it is ready. And so sort of to that earlier point, when we've been talking about the 2017 unencumbered fund balance, that's essentially talking about how we did through the course of the year. Right now, if it's $2.5 million, if that ends up being the final number, or let's say it's 5, that represents a 0.5% to a 1% surplus over what we thought we would spend last year versus what we actually spent. So talking about a unencumbered fund balance means that in the course of operating the city through the prior year, we actually operated more efficiently and ended up with a little bit of a surplus at the end of the year. We try not to have too much of a surplus for great reasons, but you know, plus or minus a 0.5%, plus or minus 1% is a really great range to be in with respect to bringing a budget in, and especially if it's a 0.5% surplus.
So are you saying with certainty then that it is not a deficit?
I believe with certainty it's not a deficit at this moment in
I
time.
have not yet heard that statement.
Right. So I'm sorry. So what I had said before was that a month ago I could have told you that we would have had, I believed, a materially accurate estimate of fund balance of about $2.5 million, pending any
Two other
expense,
accounts closing.
some other accounts closing, whatever else rolls in for as we close this 15th month.
Right, and that's where the uncertainty comes from. It's not
Exactly right.
So, okay, last question, and that is, as it relates to the MOP sale, earlier the question was asked at a previous committee meeting, have the certificates or whatever the tool is specifically that's being used to fund the supportive contracts been issued, which was like $7 million and reduced maybe to $3.9 million? Have we issued those? Have they been secured, the funding?
With respect, perhaps I'll ask Mr. Falsey if he has the answer to that.
I already kicked the ball for Robert Harris, so I don't know the answer. I know that we're paying our bills for the individuals. I don't know if funding is already being floated from the lease-leaseback transaction or not.
Right, I will find an answer and get an answer back for you. I apologize.
And so with that, they talked about, we authorized $7.9 million, and then we heard that they were probably only going to secure $3.9 million. Does that leave us the option to go back and fulfill the other half of that if we find the need?
Through the chair, I don't have the exact details on this particular financing. I can find that out. I typically it would. Yeah. For that purpose. I mean, if we wanted to use the money for some other purpose, then the assembly has to step in. And I just would, one more point would be, you know, I apologize if at any time I gave the impression that we would have our finalized numbers by the middle of May or by the middle of April or something. I think what we've been doing is trying to make sure we understood where our numbers were with respect to what we're getting out of the system, that we have faith in those numbers, that we believe they're accurate. And so, you know, we weren't trying to give you a rosier estimate earlier. I think now, as I speak about having the final numbers ready by the middle or end of August into mid-September, I think those are reasonable estimates, and I think we'll be on track to make those dates.
My only concern is we're in the positive and not in the negative.
I believe we're in the positive.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. We have Ms. LaFrance and Mr. Peterson and then Mr. Trainee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Harris, how much of the anticipated fund balance have we spent or encumbered so far?
So of the number that I threw out there, $2.5 million, to my knowledge, at this time, That's still standing alone. What I said though is that we're still getting numbers coming in on the 15th month, and that could eat into some of that available number. So right now, I expect we'll have a positive balance. How much that is, I don't know.
Okay, so as far as encumbered though, through the rest of this year, how do you know offhand how much, or maybe that probably gets into what you're going to do?
Sure, let me, through the chair, Suzanne, I think, so we have not encumbered any of the unrestricted, unknown fund balance from 2017. The action that you guys took, introduced last Tuesday night, that would be part of the 2% reserve and not the unrestricted fund.
Right.
Okay, Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've asked numerous questions about SAP over the years, but I don't believe this one has been asked. Are the rating agencies aware that we're still trying to implement SAP? And if they aren't, can they find out? Could that affect our credit rating?
Thanks. So through the chair, Mr. Peterson. So we have been very diligent in our efforts to be upfront and forthright with our rating agencies. We've told them that we're implementing SAP, that it's had a series of problems, and that we're working through a process to be able to resolve those problems and move forward. So I believe the rating agencies are sort of aware that that we're in this implementation phase, that we're still, what I would call through at least the end of May, an application development phase where we're still working on the system to make it work, as opposed to, we use the phrase go live. Well, in essence, the system has not been substantially complete, I believe, until, maybe until very recently. So I think the rating agencies are going to be fine. I think in their experience, as they look across other jurisdictions that have implemented something similar, I don't think that our experience would stand out as unique. I think that they look at this and they think, okay, it's an implementation of a complex, multifaceted, enterprise level software system, and there just are a bunch of details to take care of, any one of which stops the whole machine from moving forward until you fix it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Trainee.
Robert, you said you sent a letter to the rating agencies telling them what our problem was. Can you give somebody a copy of that letter you sent them?
Certainly, and what I referred to was with our, back in May, we went out to the markets for a June closing of our GO bonds and our refunding bonds. And in that we had an official statement which included language with respect to where we find ourselves with SAP. So I'd be happy to send a link to that.
If you would, please.
Yes, sir.
We need to track this a little bit. Other thing is, I'm seeing email relative to the report from Alaska down here, problems with BDO, prior years, money they had not paid. Are you aware of that?
Well, through the chair, Mr. Trainee. So what I'm aware of is I'm aware that in the past the port has had to restate some of their financials with respect to the sale of certain surplus materials. That restatement has taken place, and whether it has to take place again, I could defer to the controller to answer that, but that would be the kind of thing. It's a question of, there was, let's say, $200,000 worth of sheet pile on the books, and it was sold for $50, and it was how that was recorded and all that has to be restated so that the financial records of the port are accurately reflected in our financial statements. So I believe that's the matter at hand.
You
But
send us an email on that, I appreciate it. I don't want to take your time up here.
Yes, sir.
But I do want to track what the problem is down there in case it's a perpetual problem or it's a one-time thing.
yes.
I appreciate it. Thank
Yeah.
you, sir. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Any further questions for Mr. Harris before you go on to Mr. Wilbur? Okay, Mr. Wilbur.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think on 2017, Mr. Harris has given you sort of an update on what's going on there, waiting for the 15th month to close. As relates to 2018, to this date, I think departments are doing an excellent job managing their budget right now. I'm not seeing any surprises. I'm not aware of any surprises. The one thing in 2018 that we are working through is the conversations with APD on the potential move to their new facility downtown. So we're working with them to make sure that how that works out. And I met with them earlier last week, and so looking to work some grant money to make sure that that transition, assuming the agreement goes through. So right now, that's the only thing that I'm aware of. Been working with the new transit director to make sure that she's up to speed on some of the things that are going on in her world, and making sure that in her submission, as well as all of the other departments, their budgets are due, their proposed 2019 budgets are due to us at the end of the month. So we're trying to make sure that we're helping her out and her team out as much as possible as she may need. But as far as 2018 right now, I don't have anything that's alarming as far as the budget to actuals. We can give you a detailed report in August, but right now I'm not really seeing anything that troubles me. And as it relates to the 19 report, two things. 19 budgets, the departments have submitted to us at OMB, and we are now compiling the list of projects that have come in from all of the departments. The community council surveys that we received, we'll be sharing that list with the administration next week, and then start those conversations on how we prepare a proposed budget a capital budget that we will give to you in October. And then in 19, the departments are in 10 days. They're going to give us a proposed 19 budget. The guidance that I've given to them is basically assume that a continuation budget with labor, but please make us aware of any adjustments or increases in professional services contracts that we have on with them, software, leases. Those are the things we want to make sure that we're aware of. And then as requests come in for 19 or adjustments, we'll consider those and we'll share those with you. We're about 45 days away from when the administration will send you the first letter that we're required to send to you. We'll give it to you on August 31st, since I think September 1st is on the weekend. Just kind of give the administration's position on what we're looking at in 19. And so I think this group and our Budget Advisory Commission will be more engaged in the coming months on building 19. So if you have any questions on 18 or 19, please let me know, and then I'll work with Rose and if you guys have any questions. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Wilbur. We got a few questions from the queue. Ms. LaFrance?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Excuse me. Two questions. Mr. Wilbur, do you see any room in the budget for adding additional support staff for APD?
So right now, within their approved budget, I do not. However, we've talked previously, and I think members of this body have mentioned that if we do have supplementals, if we do have fund balance, that we start looking at where we might be able to support that in APD. And I think that is on our mind, but until we have a number, we're not going to recommend that. But it's definitely on our mind in 18 and definitely in 19.
And then the second question, in terms of the continuation of labor for next year's budget,
Yep.
what is the run rate increase for headcount that you typically use to cover increases in benefits or
Sure.
pay?
So what we do is after the first quarter, after we make adjustments to the 18 budget in first quarter, which basically that is the time in which whatever the personnel count is at that point and their positions and grades, and then we look at that position count and we roll that as our first initial projection to 18, and we take into account the existing bargaining unit labor increases. So if it's a contract in place, then we apply that contract for a labor increase. For medical, we just had a meeting with the folks in the medical to look at what our assumptions ought to be for medical adjustments in 2019. Right now, we're using around 6%, and we're going to be checking that. And that number sort of is our working number right now. It could vary, and then but that's how we do the roll. And then as we finalize the budget and get numbers from departments, if they tell us that position's not there or we want to move a position to professional services, we adjust when we build 19.
Thank you, Ms. LaFrance. Mr. Trainee?
If you glance, last year you sent a letter out to departments, and sometime you tell them to cut back on
Right.
spending. Are you going to plan to do that this year and give us a copy of the letter when it goes out? Because otherwise, I get copies from various departments. I'd like to have the one you're actually sending to them.
So we sent the letter out on July 2nd, or maybe the end of June. I will send you a copy of the letter.
Would you please?
Absolutely.
Other would be APD, the problem they've got with non-sworn staff.
Mm-hmm.
So I need to know, as a pulling the budget together and you get it, I'd like to see where they're going to ask you for pluses on non-sworn officers and their dispatch people and the storage people due to lockup.
I anticipate receiving that from them, and then when I get it, then I'll know what they're asking for.
In the last meeting we were at, or the one before that, they were talking about adding 17 IT people to support SAP. Is that still the plan? I want to know what the fully loaded cost of those people are going to be.
So, yeah, I believe at our last meeting, we were talking about how we continue to support SAP with a reduction of contractual services and an addition of support services, and that may be coming something up that Ona and Susie may mention. But yes, I'm aware of that as well when we're looking into 19 and how that actually solidifies as part of our 19 process as well.
Because the public always looks at growing the cost of government, adding more employees. So I want to know exactly what we're talking about. And then you can say we're stopping the contractual employees, that's one thing. But we're going to get calls to the public. We just need to know.
And I think we were, Mr. Trainee, I think I think it was reported last month, and the current plan is that there'll be a transition. There won't be just one day where there's no consultants and one day where we have the Imagine support. There has to be, and that's basically in our conversations with other jurisdictions. You sort of feather that consultant effort out at the same time you're sort of building your support staff, and then you need some contractual services in the long run. But we are aware of it. I'm anticipating that coming in as part of 19 as well.
Contractually paying no benefits. Well, a fully loaded person working for the city, we've got all the benefits that go along with that.
Through the chair, Mr. Trainee, some of the contracts that we pay on SAP are $309 an hour.
Okay.
So the transition from contractual obligations into full-time staff with benefits, fully loaded, is more than 50% less on some of those costs. So
we get in this budget cycle, we need to have something
Yep.
we can tell our constituents, so they're going to ask the question.
And we will tell you that whole story on how this cost associated in 17 and 18 for contracts and staff time on SAP transitions to this much contract and this much full-time staff, and the cost goes down between those two. And ideally, the support will increase because we'll have full-time staff dedicated just to the municipal project.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. So I'm going to ask a question before we go to Mr. Constant. You had mentioned a new transit director. My impression from the outgoing head of the people mover was that we were funding certain neighborhood routes using federal grant funds. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if those federal grants are either 2019, 2020, or later that those will start to expire. And what are our plans for trying to provide services along those routes?
Exactly. That's what I'm helping them figure out.
Okay. When I'm not sure if this will be the appropriate venue or the transportation committee. I think, well, we'll talk about that. But I'm curious when you will have a better idea and when you can present something to us.
I will. I will definitely have to have. I mean, I definitely will need that answer after in August. But in a nutshell, basically, what we did is we used grant monies we applied grant monies when we were making the transition. So basically, and then as the transition smooths out, there were efficiencies told in the system, and then as the grant monies go away, this continuing operating budget would keep us moving forward. That is the thing that I need to make sure that we're still on that course.
And is it 2019 or 2020 that is, when do the federal grant monies run out?
I don't recall, but I will find out. I think it's 19, but I'll find out.
I think it's 19 too.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure.
I will find out.
Word.
I'll let you know.
Mr. Constant.
Thank you. On the 2018 budget this year, Ona, are we holding Harmless Library Day open 7 days for the rest of the year?
As far as I know, yes, but I can confirm.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Weddleton.
So kind of going back to Dan's comments on APD, of course, we don't have enough support staff, but my understanding is, they have a budget and the chief can allocate it. So he can have 3 less police officers and have 5 support staff or whatever it works out to. So it's not like, oh, we dropped the ball and we didn't put money in there for support staff. That's kind of his thing to do.
That's the responsibility of every director.
Okay.
If they want to allocate their resources differently, then to best implement their mission, great. If they need more resources, then they need to talk to me and the administration and you.
And I will say through the chair, the police department is hiring some 911 dispatchers and support staff with its existing budget. So the question was just whether there's additional money to be added this year. I don't think there's likely to be additional money added this year with fund balance or anything else, but we're we're looking seriously at that question.
I hesitate to make this, I don't want to launch another, bring up an old wound, but when we were discussing the fund balance, we were discussing the fact that we couldn't pin it down, and SAP was preventing us from doing that. You know, my colleagues, I think, convinced me and voted against me to keep certain increases in funding from going forward. And the notion was, well, maybe we could revisit this and have another round where we could express our policy priorities and perhaps increase funding in different places. But SAP, or whatever it is preventing us from getting the solid number. It means we can never really engage in that process. And that's just a concern I think I was trying to articulate back when it first happened, that if this is the new normal, and I don't think we don't want it to be, but if this is the new normal, it effectively paralyzes this body. It means that there is we get a crack at the budget, but then there's no real traditional normal place where we would go through that revision period again. You can still do rolling increases like we're about to do, hopefully with the special election. But even then, we're sort of shooting in the dark because we don't really know what fund balance is. And the effect is sort of reducing the effective power of this body.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Trainee was in the queue, and then Mr. Constant.
It goes beyond that, of course. It's this branch of government. We're not a department. We are another branch of government, co-equal with administration. My fear is we get into next year's budget. I will not be approving any budget as a city member unless I know what this year's fund balance is. So we're playing this story come October, November, December. We're going to have a big problem on our hands. Because I'm not going to approve that budget. I know what last year's was. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Constant.
Yeah, on that topic, I've deeply thought about this and how do we as a policy-making body address this if we find ourselves in the same boat next year. And I think that what happens, at least what I'm going to propose in April, when we get to that point where we have to set the mill rates, we need to finish the budget, is that I'm going to move to take any additional funds that are required, identified as needing to be amended, and set them into the Assembly's budget. And then ask the members to vote on having that money in the Assembly's budget, that the administration can come to us and ask us to increase the priorities over the rest of the year until the budget's closed. And in that way, shift back the balance of power into the hands of policymakers instead of this weird moving target. And so anyhow, that's where my mind is at for next year, because it is a question. If we're not effectively given the opportunity to set policy, then we have to assert it.
Yeah, I just would say this. I'm not ascribing any malevolence to the administration here. I don't think this was intentional in any way. I understand that you are laboring under this very difficult transition, and I don't want to leave that perception. Mr. Peterson and Ms. Browse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, if I'm understanding correctly, some of my colleagues are saying that the new normal might be third quarter budget adjustments instead of first quarter budget adjustments. We're hoping that's not the new normal, but it could possibly realistically. And Mr. Harris seems like he might have an answer.
Right, but then most of the year as well. Anyway, Ms. Browse and then Mr. Harris.
For the chairman and the rest of the members, the difficulty that we are seated with in all of this is that we were running on one system here for 2017, and the transition to SAP took place in 2017. The combination of pushing these two systems together to get the same thing that we have historically gotten from one system for every year before this is what is causing this problem. This will not continue into other years when we are only on one system as we have been on SAP for all of 2018 and 2019 and 2020 and hopefully 20 years down the line to recoup the investment that we have made. It's getting all of the assets, all of the data, all of the information that existed here and also did not exist here into this system so that this single system now kicks out all of this information. That is the difficulty that the employees are toiling under, trying to make sure that it is accurate, because what we don't want to do is give you information that is wrong. So, the lines keep moving a little bit, but the information needs to be accurate for us to maintain a informed relationship with you, an informed relationship with our bond raters, and an informed relationship with the public. So Our goal is to get through 2018 and have achieved the transition from the blend in 2017 so that the end of 2018 goes much better and every year after that.
Thank you, Ms. Browns. Mr. Harris?
She said what I was going to say, only better.
Okay, well played. Mr. Gates?
Oh, yes, I just want to mention to the Assembly that with regard to appropriations, generally, as Mr. Weddleton said, appropriations are often made for an entire department. The department decides how they're expended, but that's not the only way appropriations are made. They can be made, and that's in our charter and code. They can be made for elements of expense or specific expenditures. So I think we can make an appropriation specifically for a certain type of staff for APD. That's my opinion, and there might be some disagreements about that. But I want to make sure we're aware we can make an appropriation for something specific as opposed to the department's budget.
Thank you, Mr. Gates. Mr. Trainee?
One last thing. We don't blame you for SAP. We know the mayor is about SAP, okay? It's not your problem. You guys were unfortunately the administration that came on when we had to live with SAP. We're just trying to tell you, we've been chafing under this. We need your help in get this resolved. It's not this administration brought this turkey to us. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. So, Mr. Tamani, am I pronouncing that right? Tamani. He is Mr. Tamani. Mr. Tamani is not here, I don't believe, today. He wasn't able to make it. So, we don't have item number 5. So, on to number 6, Ms. Marshall.
We're going to invert the order again.
Oh.
Bill's presentation is much longer
Ah.
than ours is.
Shocking.
It's a great thing.
Is it a?
So we're going to do another
Okay, good.
PowerPoint?
In the show. Let's talk turkey, speaking of SAP. So this is the fourth iteration of the SAP, what is going on in payroll story. I'm going to briefly run through the update of the last time. Then I'm going to give you a new window into our current status of actual pay corrections. And then we're going to dive more deeply into the weeds than we ever have before, hopefully with the upshot that we have maximum visibility on what's going on. So here we go. I have said every time I've done this presentation, there are 3 ways into the payroll department. One is the number of paper pay corrections submitted by employees and what their current status is. And when we turned SAP on, we got many more pay corrections than we used to have, but the trend looked good. We updated it once, and then we updated it again, and now we are even further updating it, and it is the same story. So we have stabilized at this rate that is higher than the rate that we used to be at, but it is manageable, and we do have some reason to think that it is going to ultimately go down to the rate that it was previously at.
So we have Mr. Constant would like to ask a question.
So I have heard reports from members of the bargaining units that they're being told no longer to submit corrections.
So that's why we have 3 windows. I think that is a rare phenomenon, but it's not. It does happen. I think there are times when we know that there is a defect that is causing a problem every single time, that we are tracking it because we know about it already, and we don't need the extra paper pay correction. I don't think that is responsible for the majority of the dip between the 800 that are missing after January. I think it could be having a onesie-twosie effect, but I don't think it's substantially skewing the statistics. And I'll give you more update on that as we get all the way to the very end.
Could it be a significant chunk of this, though?
Well, that's half a month. That's half a month, so
Oh,
that's
I see.
going to jump back up to 200.
Oh, okay.
So with
Gotcha.
noise, we're somewhere 200, 250 right now, and maybe we're missing some that we know are causing the same problem. I know that that's true with a NICA temp situation. I don't know if it's true on APD, but that's a preview of a coming attraction before the end of the story. So first window into it, paper pay corrections. Now what did I say we did with the paper pay corrections? I said we looked at them, we got smart with them, we processed some really egregious ones, but largely we put them aside and fixed the machine because the machine had to stop generating errors and the machine could correct the problem more rapidly than moving through the 5,000 pay corrections. So second and third window, we're looking at the machine. A machine, once you reconfigure it, it knows that it overpaid people, and we have not recouped any of these. I did it once, twice, 3 times, 4 times. This is the same story. It was pretty bad when we turned it on. It's gotten a lot better. I did provide some context in one of the earlier meetings, and just for memorialization, I wrote it down this time, so some context. Since we turned the machine on, and as of the last update, we processed payroll 19 times. rough order of magnitude, every time we do payroll, we pay $7 million. So if you do that math, we've pushed out $133 million. The overpayments that have been identified by the system are 1.6 or thereabout as of 6/27, so that's like a 1.2% error. If you look only at this year, when it's stabilized a lot better, we're down to about a 0.2% error. Just not to totally minimize it, it's still an overpayment, it's still a problem, it's still millions of dollars, but it's not a 20% error on the whole system. Just providing some background context. That's the second window. The overpayment story is largely the same as it was. Underpayments, which we have actually corrected. Remember, I gave you the wrong charts the first few times, where I realized only after the fact that this was when we were actually making the payments, not when the error occurred. Then I got based on when the month error originally happened, and the update for that is the same. So I maybe didn't even put it in here this time, but it is basically the same chart. There's no real news there. The three windows then I also gave you on the particular unions, and here too, the story has not really been changing. It is largely stable. We can look at those if anyone wants to spend some more time on it. Largely, most of the effect is the police department. And I will step through these very quickly because I don't know that they have particular content. I want to get to the new stuff, but we can go back to them if anyone's interested. Okay, so getting to the new stuff. So last time I said the new stuff was, since we turned it on, we had 5,366 pay corrections come in the door. Where are we on actually getting through all of them since then? And now we have more pay corrections because we've got another 4 weeks. So we're at 5,576. And the last time we talked about this, I said those pay corrections were in 3 categories. They were the one that was easiest to understand, done, which is about 2,000 of them, 38%. I said there was a category called in-verification review, where either a department was chewing on them or the department had handed them to payroll, and hopefully that number would get a lot smaller. And finally, there were a certain number of pay corrections that were not closed because they were being held back by a defect. I said I hoped when we spoke again this month that the yellow column would break down into blue and green columns, and that the blue column would also break down into green columns. So let's see what actually happened. It actually is a good news story. So here's where we're at now. We're at 63%, no kidding, done. We're at 3,500 pay corrections finished out of the 5,500. The in-verification review number did get smaller. Those being affected by a defect also got smaller. And now here's where we're going to go all the way down the rabbit hole. I will give you further insight into these yellow and blue categories. So in-verification review, if we take these 850 and look at them more closely, they break down into 3 categories. We assembled a war department, a war room, where we pulled in all the departments to help payroll. I said that effort had largely disbanded because the departments had finished. And you see that here. There are only 3 buckets because all the departments are finished with the exception of fire and transit. The y-axis on this graph is truncated, so this is actually 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 if you look at it, even though it looks like it's radically different between blue, yellow, and green. But a third of them are with payroll, which means the work is already done. Payroll is just checking if the work was done correctly. That gives me some hope that when we next do this update, at least a third of this 15% will quickly disappear into a blue column or a green column, done or held back by a defect, because this is checking other people's work. Fire is still chewing through the fire corrections. I will make a special note, as I made last time. I think transit is in a different category. The way SAP is taking information from TeleDriver was more problematic than I realized 3 months ago, and I think they are going to lag, but hopefully the next time we meet we will be pretty close to cleaning this all up and making this part of it just a transit story. And we have built a better mousetrap, or we're actively working on building a better mousetrap for transit, so hopefully that'll be a cleaner story by the next time we meet too.
Bill, hold on a second. Do you have a question on this specifically?
Mr. Palsy, are we having outside consultants fix the SAP problem, or are we using internal employees to fix the SAP problem? This is always the time like when you send stuff out. So we do have internal employees fixing the defect in SAP, or are we sending it outside?
Well, through the chair, the answer is both. This is the general SAP story. These are the $309 running down to $100 an hour employees. Largely, we have our own internal subject matter experts who identify the defect, describe what needs to be changed. They hand it off to the consultants who hand it off to a developer. Some of that work we can do internally, a lot of it we don't.
And that's what we're trying to build up a resource base so that we can do that internally.
Okay, so the upshot of this, on the yellow chart on the top, 15% in verification review. I'm hopeful that most of the green column will have largely disappeared on the step down by the next time we meet. That should be shrunk down to maybe more like 10% or 7%. We'll see. The last column there is the pay corrections that were held back by defect. This is where we're going to go way down the rabbit hole. Here we go. The 21% are now being held back by a defect. Last time we met, I said there were 24 open defects. Sorry, this is hard to see. 24 open defects, 4 of which required us to engage in some union negotiations before we could fix the defect. The status today is there are now 16 open defects, not 24, because we had a release push between then and now, and only 2 require negotiations because we did 2 administrative agreements through the Assembly since we last met. The last 2 are an APDEA and an IBEW. There are also 33 closed defects that are affecting pay corrections, which gives us 51 defects relating to the unfinished pay corrections. Now you might ask, how could a closed defect affect pay corrections? And this is where I have to step back all the way to the beginning and remind ourselves that we're fixing the system, and then after the system is fixed, there is this separate kind of audit process where we pick up the paper and we say, did we correctly fix it? So there are 33 defects that are holding back pay corrections that are probably already done. And to give you a full window into that, we now have a credible crosswalk between all the defects that are affecting pay corrections and the pay corrections they are affecting. So this is way more detail than you probably want, but every defect gets a 4-number code. So you could say, here's defect 2496. They're in one of 3 statuses. We actually have already finished them. They are still open, or they are the 2s that require a collective bargaining agreement change. And the way you can read this kind of chart is you could take, for example, these 10 that came in from IBEW MLP. There's paper pay corrections that said, I don't know what it might say, my shift differential was wrong and my overtime was wrong. Payroll has looked at that and said, that is a known defect 2818 and a known defect 2882. Both of those are blue, both of those are closed. Hopefully that means all 10 of those have already been paid out correctly, finished from the employee's perspective, but they're still open from payroll side because we haven't finished the crosswalk from how did the closed defect affect the paper correction, can we put it in a closed pile. So there's an example where 10 of them may not even be blue. They may already be green completed pay corrections. We just have to cross the T's, dot the I's. But it gets even more complicated, and just to give you a flavor of this, so look at the next one down here. It came in from MLP. 2818 again, but the second defect is 2888, and that requires a CBA change. So even if we have closed 2818, it's not going to finish the pay correction because it's held up by more than one defect. But the good news is there are many, like these 116 here, that are just one defect, and so those might already be off the board. All of which means we are tracking this very closely, we're getting way into the weeds, and the upshot for you guys is we can now tell you with some confidence how each defect is affecting all the pay correction population. And the potential good news story here is that there are a small number of defects that are holding back the majority of those 1,151 in the held back by defect category, which means I hope that as we do the next 2 release cycles, we will wipe out most of this category. I didn't circle the big blue one because the big blue one is there were some number of pay corrections which involved more than 2 defects, 3, and that the pivot table just got too confusing, and so I don't have clear visibility into that chunk, but it should really break into the other pie slices. And the final chart I'm going to show you, and then I'll take some questions, is then the upshot. We have 16 open defects. Those 16 affect 681 corrections. The 2 requiring negotiations, one is the APDA shift differential, which we're very close. I understand we're like tinkering over 2 sentences now to finishing that. That individual correct defect affects 201 corrections, and it is like every single payroll we generate new pay errors because of that. It is a biggie. It's probably the biggest, I know it is the defect that is holding back more corrections than any other defect. So we are trying very hard to bring that to conclusion with the union. That'll then have to come to you, but there is a delay because every time we amend a CBA, there's, I believe, an extraordinary public notice period. So it's not the regular introduce it, act on the next meeting. I think it's 30 days or 60 days. So, So we're down to 2 requiring negotiations. The 33 that are closed affect 937. The most optimistic way to roll all these up then is to say, if you imagine that the defects that we have closed have been closed correctly and did everything that the pay correction was requesting, then we might be down to as few as 883 in the blue circled column, not 1,151, because the open plus the 2 requiring negotiations add up to that total. So we might, again, already have shaved off a lot of this category. Release 2 is on July 27th, so now remember we're processing these corrections in SAP. We are bundling them so we can test them as a group and launch them all as a group so that we don't fix something and break 2 other things. We know what the collective impact of all the fixes are at one time. So we're pushing them on release schedules. The next release should fix 4 of the pending defects, which will take out 230 corrections. The following release should fix 7 more of the open defects affecting all or part of 394. There is a single defect that we are processing out of the release schedule because it is a biggie and we want to get it fixed immediately. That should take out 11, which means that we have now a plan that should leave us with not more than 5 defects, leaving around 50 pay corrections only in this blue category. If we can get to them faster than the current release schedule, we will do that. We're trying to be realistic about our actual throughput capability, but that's the current state of play. All of which rolls up to, I'm hopeful that when next we meet, this column 2 will be significantly smaller and that the completed will be significantly higher. I think though, and I'll preview for you, I think the next time we meet, we might see another big jump in completed. We might go from 63 to, who knows, 80. And then it probably, the pace of progress will slow down, because we'll be down to the kind of onesie-twosies, where instead of fixing something that fixes hundreds of pay corrections at once, we'll be fixing something that fixes 2 or 3 pay corrections. And so there'll be the last 5% slog, the goal line stand, but we're making progress. I think we have a good handle on the problem now. It's getting better.
Thank you, Mr. Falsey. Mr. Train and Mr. Weldon.
Bill, just a quick question, Ray. Thanks for your work on this. And the IT director may be able to answer this, or you, Bill. When's the next massive update come from SAP? Because I know we bought into their updates. You have to have that. So when is the next update going to take? And will we go back in time with the next update and have these rejects again? Or is SAP learning from the rejects we've had? And that'll be built into their update.
So I will defer to Marshall, but I will tease out between 2 things. These defects are largely not defects in the off-the-shelf SAP program. These are bespoke configurations that we have required, and the kinds of updates that we're getting from SAP are their background, like Windows updates, like security patches.
I just want to make sure that's the case, that it's not something that's going to throw us back 2 steps from the 1 step we've taken.
And we will go through extensive testing to ensure that.
When's that going to take effect?
Well, we have a next scheduled release is they call it an HR service pack, and I think that's the end of November. But I'm not, I can get back to you on that.
You can give it back to me, I'd appreciate it, because I did this for the Air Force. And every now and then we'd have a massive update, and all the advances we made were wiped out, and we'd have to start over again. So I want to make sure that doesn't happen this time.
Right, yeah. It's not a rollback. It's like the background and should not impact our configuration, but we will fully test.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton.
On the changes to the union contracts to fix some of these, we have at least 28 days. Can you introduce something that's just maybe a little vague sooner, say contract changes to fix these problems, and then we can get it done quicker, or do you have to have exact wording?
Well, through the chair, historically our practice has always been the Assembly is ratifying or approving this administrative agreement, and the administrative agreement is attached. I suppose we could try to finagle it where, say, it's substantially similar to this draft, and then when we get to the final action, we fix it. It may be neither here nor there now, because we're hopeful by the next time we actually have an Assembly meeting, we'll have the agreement. And so there's nothing to expedite right now.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Any further questions for Mr. Falsey? So is there a separate, report from Ms. Marshall, or?
We were just going to do an update on the ask from last time, the update on SAP Future State and how we are going to move some IT funding around to accommodate the change.
So let's, Mr. Constant has a question for Mr.
Hey,
Falsey.
Business College Bill, thank you. This is the first time the report has gotten to the level of detail that gives confidence to me at least that progress is being made. So thank you.
Is there any other questions for Mr. Falsey before we move on to Ms. Marshall? Okay, please.
Okay, so basically what we have said, this is the SAP Future State. This is where we want to get to where we have more staff expertise, more expertise on staff and less relying on consultants. So we presented this last time, and this model hasn't changed. So, to get us from this transition, so August through December, we are looking at doing a budget transfer to support 1.7 million in funds to pay for additional labor and then pay for the consulting cost throughout the end of this year. And what that kind of looks like is the SAP consultant overview is that August, we're just going to be transitioning that cost down. So as we do it, as we get people on board, we'll be doing the transfer of knowledge from consultant to employee plan, and then have a less draw on consultants as we move forward. And then here's what we're trying to get these additional positions hired on through the end of the year, and that process takes a little while, so we're thinking they would actually start in September. And that's what we see that additional cost as. So all of the together, that is the 1.7 million.
Yeah, so what we'll be bringing to you, all of this requires assembly approval and documentation. So there's a handful of things that you'll see coming across the agenda. One of which is the simplest of these things, if you will. It's the organization of IT into direct reporting to the mayor, so that we have the direct connection to make sure that all of this kind of information continues to come, and we are in line with IT as they continue to develop SAP and this new world of technology that we will now be living under for who knows how long. So there's that reorganization documentation. This will require an AM and an AR to do a budget transfer within IT. Instead of coming and asking for additional funding to be added to the budget, we went through and scrubbed every portion that we could in existing budgets to figure out, we're halfway through the year. Are we going to need this? Do we need this? Can we move some things around? And luckily, IT has a line item in their budget that allows us to move some of the designated funds for SAP recovery into SAP support. So it's 1.7, and it does not impact IT's bottom line. It does not impact any other departmental bottom lines. It's all within the existing budget for 2018. Lance can give you more detail on all the very, very specifics about it. But
Mr. Peterson and Mr. Weddleton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So are we having trouble recruiting people with the technical expertise necessary? And if we are we looking at possibly trying to recruit some of the consultants to come to work for us full time?
I think the conversation has definitely been socialized, but we have not formally started recruiting yet because we don't have the funding to secure it. So, but yes, we've socialized that conversation. But I don't really have any more details.
Okay. All right, thank you.
As soon as we're able to have an approved budget transfer with the funds available, we'll go through the ER position description process and then go out for recruitment. I mean, we haven't kept our mouths shut about that we're going to need people to be doing X, Y, and Z, and there's been networking about needing those things. We have tried to woo consultants. So there's definitely a lot of that going on, but we don't want to get ahead of ourselves until we have the actual approval to go ahead and move forward on it.
Great,
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Weddleton and Ms. LaFrance.
That gets back a little bit to what I was talking about with APD, within the total budget for your department. So, with APD, I'm saying, do we have to approve then moving money from officers to support staff? And my understanding was no, he doesn't. But you're saying here, and in yours, we do.
It depends on the type of line item. This is my understanding of it. It depends on the type of line item. With APD in particular, creating a whole new set of positions that may not exist for non-sworns would require, I believe, a lot of movement within their budget that we would want to have assembly approval on. I don't know if we are required to have it, but we would definitely want everyone to know that that's what's happening. There is some discretion for the directors to go in and move things around from labor to non-labor depending on what the activities of the year are. But changes of this magnitude and of this type in particular require assembly approval, and also we would like you to know that that's what we're doing. So you will have more documentation to approve. It will include contract approval extension for the consultants who are currently under contract, and what's the other?
It'll, I think, labor.
Right, the labor ad for the new positions for the rest of the year. So it's not terribly confusing. It's definitely not as confusing as what Bill was talking about, but but the information is important to understand how the money is moving around, because everyone has been so curious about what are we doing and how are we solving the problem. So this is one of the ways.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Two quick questions. So, Ona, is the plan to bring on, 4 people by the end of the year?
Ideally, at least, yeah. That's what we know that we need in order to, and what we think is the highest use of the funding to get the initial transition underway. So the 2019 budget, as Mr. Trainee talked about earlier, will include, I don't believe 17 new positions, but it is 10 new positions, including these 4, so an additional 6 for 2019, but will include an offset from the consultant dollars. So we're not 100% on how much that increase to the budget will be, but it will not be significant in light of everything else.
And then second question, what was SAP recovery, or what was that going to cover?
It recovers the funding to pay back the debt.
Right.
Okay, just making sure.
Covers the funding to pay back the debt, and that's what we can.
So because we weren't fully functional at the beginning of the year, there are IGCs in everybody's budget to recover the dollars associated with funding the program. So because it's pushed back to June, that money exists in the budgets that we can still use for support as opposed to recovery.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Trainee, then that'll be our last question. We're out of time.
Mr. Chair, just looking at 2019, these 10 positions, I just want to know what the pay structure is and the benefits.
Yeah.
And they should all, probably if they're new, they're on PERS 4, which is it's a 401k. So I just want to know where we're going.
And once we have the full structure for 2019, we'll bring you all of that information and the salaries associated with the
Thanks,
positions.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Is there anyone here from the public who'd like to speak? We're over time, but if we could take a couple minutes. Okay, with that.